Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves on this Tuesday. Today's episode, we're focusing all about Media Day on Monday. Real basketball starts today, the start of Timberwolves training camp. Preseason opener is only 6 days away. There's plenty to talk about from Monday's Media Day. All the biggest quotes, all the biggest talking points from the players, the coaches, and the front office. We'll also get into empty calorie players. Of course, the Timberwolves have one of the chief members of that so-called, category of NBA players. So I want to get into all that on today's show. Welcome in to Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm also the editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy start of NBA training camp, of Timberwolves training camp. The preseason opener only 6 days away. Media Day was Monday. That's what today's show is going to be all about. And I want to talk about the biggest quotes, the most important things that came out of Monday's Media Day, and then peek ahead at what to look forward to in training camp. I also want to get into the idea of empty calories players. There's an article that I read the other day that I really want to get into and talk about the idea of Karl-Anthony Towns as an empty calories player. I know that's not a new take necessarily, but I think that this article is written in a perspective where it positions Towns as not that, right? Devin Booker is the most recent example of a guy that players thought was a good stats, bad teams type of a player. And then, of course, Devin Booker, lo and behold, has a fantastic year, as does his team last season. So I want to get into Towns in that context towards the end of the show today. I want to hit all the Media Day stuff first. A quick reminder here off the top, you can follow the show anywhere you listen to podcasts. That includes Apple, Google, Spotify, the all-new Odyssey app, and of course, also now on YouTube. And also a thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Remember, free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T Wolves and at B Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Okay. Media Day was Monday. It was great to hear from all the players, most of the players, and off the top, new ownership. I'm not going to talk as much about that today. I don't know that there was much to glean from the Mark Lowry, Alex Rodriguez presser with Glenn Taylor, outside of Glenn Taylor setting the tone for the day by saying he would not talk about any dismissed employees or players that were not with the team, which or are not on the roster currently, which of course is a not so indirect way of referencing the Gerson Rosas dismissal from 5 days prior, and then also of course the ongoing Ben Simmons rumors, and of course Simmons is yet to report to Philadelphia's camp. So Taylor set that tone early. Lowry and Rodriguez, the only really notable thing to come out of that was their excitement about the Timberwolves, their excitement about the Minnesota Lynx as well, and also the in relation to the team relocating. They were very, again, direct about saying they anticipate they are planning on the team staying in Minnesota. I forget the exact word that was used, but basically, this team's staying in Minnesota. There's always a possibility of a new arena down the road, that sort of a thing. Not really much else that was all that significant from the Lowry, Rodriguez, Taylor presser. One of the more interesting things that we saw early on, Chris Finch and Sachin Gupta were the next ones to take the stage. Of course, Finch, the head coach, Gupta, the executive vice president of basketball operations, and currently overseeing the entire basketball operations department. Even though he doesn't have that interim tag and he's not the interim president, he's the one that with the oversight. He was the right-hand man to Gerson Rosas previously. And he was, Gupta hasn't spoken much publicly. That's kind of his thing. If you've read any profiles on him, I think John Krasinski's had a good one at The Athletic. There's actually another really good profile out by Ben Falk over at Cleaning the Glass. Of course, he's a longtime front office member with Philadelphia, and I believe there was one other place he was prior to Philadelphia. So he worked with Gupta with the Sixers, and over at cleaningtheglass.com, he's got a good article about Gupta. But he's very soft-spoken. He's not a center of attention guy. Doesn't seem super comfortable in front of a microphone or the camera, comfortable enough, not out of place necessarily, but clearly it's not his favorite thing. And he actually spoke to that as well. I thought Gupta was fascinating. He actually made a comment, side note, where he was asked about, what through his career has prepared him for this moment to lead a front office. And he basically said, hey, I've gained the confidence that I can do this now. He actually, he's, and I'm paraphrasing, But that's what he said. He said, like, hey, now I know I can do this. I maybe wasn't sure basically a few years ago. And now I know that I can, and I'm ready. I'm ready for this challenge. It's my dream. But he and Finch talked, and there were a number of interesting things that came up. One of the highlights was the vaccination status of the team. I had mentioned on Monday's show that Darren Wolfson of Score North and KSTP in the Twin Cities had reported back on Friday that the team was well on its way to getting everybody vaccinated. They were close, basically. And that was echoed by Finch and Gupta. They said that the entire team is vaccinated. There's 2 players that are in the process of being fully vaccinated. So everybody's gotten at least that initial shot, and they will be fully vaccinated very shortly. So very good news. Of course, the NBA continues to, and actually, if we're talking, global NBA news, and of course the Locked On NBA show is gonna have this covered very well, as they always do over there. But Monday was a tough day around the league with media days. The question of the vaccination status of many players has really kind of taken hold, and rightfully so, understandably so. And CJ McCollum had tweeted out roughly 90% of NBA players are vaccinated. So if you think about it, it's actually better than the general population, right? The general population of the United States, more players are vaccinated than probably in almost any other profession, except for, who knows, I'm guessing now, but probably the medical field, right? Um, and but yet the Andrew Wiggins, the Kyrie Irvings of the world are the ones who, those two especially, are the ones taking the headlines. And we'll get into Karl-Anthony Towns here in just a second. Or actually, that's not a bad. Well, I'll get to Towns in a second, and what he was asked and what he talked about on Media Day on Monday. But the vaccination status of players league wide really was kind of front and center on Monday. And for better or for worse, I think it's certainly an important topic, and I understand why that's the case. But the NBA is in a tough spot, and maybe it goes away sooner rather than later, right? Because if 90% of players are vaccinated, and the league is really testing unvaccinated players daily, and I think in some cases twice on the day of games. Now, of course, the tricky thing is in the cities and states where there's ordinances saying that you can't play in this group setting if you're not vaccinated, which of course would impact the Brooklyn Nets and Kyrie Irving, and the Golden State Warriors and Andrew Wiggins playing in San Francisco. So it's not going to go away. But I guess as taking the main talking point coming out of media day, the NBA certainly didn't want this to be the case. And I guess whatever that's going to take to make that talking point shift, the league's going to have to try and figure that out. Obviously, the easy answer is get everybody vaccinated, but it's not quite that simple. Of course, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar speaking out about it, saying the league should basically require everybody to be vaccinated. Interested to see where this goes from here, but it shouldn't be an issue related to the Timberwolves, as it sounds like players and staff are well on the way to be completely vaccinated. Finch and Gupta as a whole were fairly subdued. It wasn't, I guess I don't know what I was expecting on the heels of the Rosas news last week, but they were, and it's also both of their natures, right? Finch is a good natured guy, but he's not a rah type person in front of the camera, at least, or in front of the microphone. And Gupta certainly is not. So it wasn't like a really celebratory mood. I think several of the players were much more jovial than Finch and Gupta were, and understandably so, I guess. But I thought that they were relatively very even keeled, is maybe overselling their body language and the way that they approached media day, for whatever that's worth. And I'll talk about Towns here quickly before getting on to some of the other stuff. Karl-Anthony Towns made some headlines because of what he spoke on. And he basically just kind of talked about the tumultuous, and he didn't use the word tumultuous. That's my word. But I think it's a fair way to describe his NBA career to this point. He talked through all the different things he's gone through, from, he listed, as he said, the death of a head coach, of course, meaning Flip Saunders. He talked about the front office regime changes, as he called it, all the players he's played with and how much he's enjoyed playing with different teammates, but at the same time, not even being able to build relationships really with some of these guys who have come and gone. And, Dave Benz, of course, the TV voice at Bally Sports North for the Timberwolves, of course, fantastic. Dave's fantastic. He was emceeing and kind of interjected and said COVID, and then Towns mentioned COVID as well, and of course the hardships he went through personally there. And the point Towns was making, he says he's been a consummate professional. He says he's always put the Wolves before himself, and he's been a consummate professional, and has been allowed. I think he said the word he used was defamed by teammates, and basically, but he said punching bag. He's been a punching bag for teammates. I think that's pretty directly tied to Jimmy Butler from a couple years back, 3 years back now, I guess. But interesting that he went there, but also very candid. And I mean, you listen to him, like, as a Timberwolves fans know exactly what he means. And if you follow this team and have, very closely over the past, I don't know, any any stretch of the franchise history, he's not exaggerating. I mean, Towns, for somebody who's already been an All NBA player, he's been a three-time All Star and was Rookie of the Year, number one overall pick, almost went undefeated in college. Like, he's a guy who has a resume and is one of the best, if not the best, shooting big man center of all time, and certainly in today's game as well. I mean, he's got some. He's not just like a rookie talking about, man, things have been tough. Like, he's legit had it tough for the last 5 or 6 years. The organization hasn't done a good job of surrounding him with talent, and I'll get more into this at the end of the show. I want to talk about the empty stats, the empty stats, empty calorie player idea later in the show. But Towns got in a soapbox a little bit, and it was from the heart, and that's how Towns typically is. He's far less guarded now in the media than he was early in his career, and he's lived a lot of life since then, and I think he did a really good job addressing the questions that were asked of him. I want to get into a couple of other things, just kind of some fun things for media day, and then get into the empty calorie thing here in just a minute. So we're gonna get into all that on today's show. Plenty to talk about, and all week too. By the way, this is Monday through Friday now. We'll have shows Monday through Friday from this point forward through the season. So be sure you're subscribed and you're following the show, but plenty to talk about. Today's episode is brought to us by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have a computer with access to rockauto.com both at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every single customer, and they have everything you could need, from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil, to even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, let's go ahead and get into the rest of the media day stuff. Um, the other note that I had, kind of just overall, and I think this is more specific to, I guess more related to Finch, Gupta, and Towns, because they're the ones who kind of address the Rosa situation tangentially. Again, Glenn Taylor set the tone early in the day by saying, like, "Hey, we're not talking about this." Basically, um, nobody really had much reaction. The team seemed to handle this well. I think the Taylor's tone setting thing was smart. As somebody who's dealt with some PR communications type stuff for a day job, you know, it's they handled it well. I mean, today, or I should say Monday during media day. I mean, the team did a good job of kind of addressing it head on at the start, and then answering the media questions that Finch at one point shut down. I think it was actually Doogie, Darren Wolfson's question specifically to Rosas, or about Rosas, and Finch was like, "Hey, Doogie, I'm not going there." Um, but the players seem pretty unbothered by it, and maybe that's a glimpse into just how much the players, or how far players are actually removed in a lot of cases from front office decision making, and the actual personalities in the front office. It's interesting because Rosas was known to, he was on the practice court fairly regularly. He addressed the team fairly regularly, which isn't always the case with front office executives. Was in the locker room at times pretty regularly. But still, the team's like, hey, we've still got the same coach, same staff that we were expecting to have. A lot of the roster's the same. These guys have been together. They were down in Miami together, working out, many of them, and they've been doing informal individual workouts the last couple of weeks, or group workouts, not necessarily organized team activities at the facility. And they just kind of, as a whole, as a body of players, kind of seemed pretty nonplussed by the idea that, or by the, this, what is clearly tumultuous, and it is. There's no other way to say it. No team plans to fire their president of basketball operations 5 days before media day. 12 days before the preseason opener. That was never the plan, and nobody would ever suggest it was. But for the last 5 days, 6 days of hand wringing and saying, "What's wrong with the Timberwolves? What's going to happen now?" They handled it really well. It was just kind of like, yeah, whatever. We're ready to play this season, and it wasn't. They did a good job of making it not the story. the vaccination thing league-wide is the story. Nobody's really talking about the Timberwolves anymore. And that's a good thing in this scenario. Of course, the Ben Simmons saga is still ongoing, and the Wolves could get certainly mentioned in that, of course, in a much more positive light. That's a much more positive conversation, is the possibility they could land Ben Simmons. They're not going away from the national conversation in that respect, but the Rosas thing is kind of behind them at this point. It seems, knock on wood, that seems to be the case. A couple of other notable things. This is kind of fun. We've talked about Anthony Edwards being taller. Finch had said this a few weeks ago in an interview. It was like mid-August when he said that he'd grown an inch or two. Edwards, he said he has, and that he's going to be the same player. He's going to keep being aggressive. I think he said be a killer, regardless of his height. Jaden McDaniels has also grown. He may actually be 6'10" now. He was 6'8" last year, listed at 6'8". He's now at least 6'9.5", if not 6'10". And there's photos, videos floating around. Actually, the Timberwolves team account put out a quick 1-minute clip of a few of the guys. I think it was Cat, D'Lo, McDaniels, Nas, and Okogie, all kind of taking a photo together. And McDaniels is every bit as tall, and probably, certainly with the hair, slightly taller than Karl-Anthony Towns, which says that McDaniels is all of 6'10", and Towns really is 6'10". I mean, if McDaniels can maintain that same fluidity that he has with the ball in his hands and the lateral quickness he has defensively, and really be 6'10" and with length, with the wingspan that he has, and Anthony Edwards is legit 6'6" now instead of 6'4". If each of these guys grew 2 inches, I mean, that's incredible. Everybody felt good about them as a rookie duo coming out of last year, but these guys are still growing. It's just incredible. Another thing that's I thought stood out to me, Taurean Prince talked a lot about not feeling good from a health perspective. His ankle, he had kind of chronic ankle problems. He had trouble getting out of bed in the morning and walking to the bathroom. And he had surgery in the offseason. He feels much better now. He feels like he's in a good place, and he's excited to guard multiple positions. He was surprised in a good way about the trade to Minnesota. And, this is my word now, seemed rejuvenated, although he's a fairly straightforward, not super exciting delivery on what he was saying, but he certainly seemed like there was some rejuvenation perhaps to the idea of playing with a team that has some hopes, right? He started last year with Brooklyn, and of course Brooklyn had high hopes. He was traded. Cleveland did not last year, and if he had been in Cleveland this year, I know that they're talking, right now that team is talking about of course they are, because it's media day. That's what happens. But they're talking about wanting to be more competitive, and they could be, who knows, in the East at this point. But the Wolves are going to be a better team than the Cleveland Cavaliers this year. I don't think there's any question about that. And Prince has a chance to play a real role in a team that's trying to make the playoffs. And I think that sounded like it was attractive to him, as it should be. So I think the overall themes, the takeaways are, the Rosas thing was not as big of a deal. Vaccination status is in a good place. Towns spoke from the heart. Finch and Gupta looked the part, even though they maybe were subdued, is probably the word I would use to describe how they handled everything. And the fact that Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards are growing, apparently. Those are the main takeaways from the day. Nothing too groundbreaking, which is probably a good thing. We'll collectively hold our breath by the time you're watching or listening to this. Perhaps we know if Ben Simmons indeed is a holdout at Sixers training camp. We'll know for sure sometime on Tuesday. But that's, of course, the story to keep watching. I want to close the show today by talking about the idea of empty calorie stars. I want to get into this article that was written by Daniel Lubofsky, and hopefully I'm saying that right. I think it's actually a really fascinating article about Karl-Anthony Towns and Devin Booker. And as the title of this article says, the myth of empty calorie stars. So I want to read a couple excerpts from that, get into that conversation a little bit, and add some of my thoughts to it. I think it's an interesting topic for sure. So we're going to get into all that still on the show today. First, though, before we get into that, let's talk about our friends over at Sleeper. Talk a little fantasy basketball. In 2018, the fantasy sports experts at Sleeper realized that fantasy basketball was broken. Games were being won and lost based on whose players had more scheduled games that week. It made no sense and required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's called Game Pick, and it's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count towards their team's total score, ensuring an even number of games played between opponents. The days of losing because your opponent's players simply had more scheduled games to play in that week are over. The days of mindless daily busy work are also over, and the days of giving up halfway through the season because of said busy work also over. In game picks, you pick one game per week for each player based on player matchups, home versus away, opponent's defensive ranking, pace of play, and more. All of that adds up to more strategy and less busy work. Whether you prefer redraft, keeper, or fantasy, Game Picks has you covered. Sleeper crack the fantasy basketball code. If you play fantasy football, which, by the way, I play my Dynasty League for fantasies on Sleeper, and it's great. If you prefer building out a weekly strategy versus daily busy work, you're going to love Game Picks. Download the Sleeper app and start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed. Let's also talk about our outstanding friends over at betonline.ag. We're back and better than ever. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back to start another football season. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With the new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, betonline.ag continues to be the number one source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100% welcome bonus. That's 100%. It's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Don't forget to use the promo code NFL100 to cash in on that. From football to basketball, boxing, right on down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Also, a quick reminder as well. Thanks again for listening to Locked On Wolves, of course, and also for making it your first listen every day. And we're going to get into to all things empty calorie star players here in just a moment. Okay, so this article, I'm going to get it pulled up here, make sure I get the author's name correct and all that stuff. This is written on Daniel Lebowski's page on Medium, excuse me. And the title of the piece is Cat Devin Booker and the Myth of Empty Calorie Stars. And if you're a Timberwolves fan, presumably you are, if you've made it to this point in the podcast, or I guess maybe just a general NBA fan that has great taste in listening to Locked On Wolves, you've no doubt heard the criticism of Karl-Anthony Towns of him as an empty stats player, a good stats, bad team player. You may hear people talk about, a guy who puts up good fantasy numbers, all those, very, I guess, I don't know, kind of, I don't know, just divisive ways of describing a player. And I think largely unfair criticism, right? But do people really realize how good he is? I think that's the question. And that's what Daniel gets to in this article. Again, Daniel Lebowski, and I'll spell it Lubofsky, and it's his page on Medium. And he just writes a really good piece about, like, hey, let's not forget about how good Karl-Anthony Towns is. So the example he gives is, he says, you see the incredible stat lines he produces on a nightly basis. You also see just a single winning season and playoff appearance in 6 years in the NBA. Guess which one sticks? Basically, what are people taking away from this? People say he's not a top X NBA player, empty calorie player, etc. And then the line he draws is directly to Devin Booker of the Suns. And it's an obvious one, right? And I am guilty of this a little bit with Booker. And I think some of the criticism is fair, just as some of it is with Towns. But the point here is we're completely overthinking how good Karl-Anthony Towns is. And I say the people who are making this argument, and this isn't a straw man argument. If you pay attention to the NBA at all, you hear this argument. There's a reason that Towns is ranked, roughly 25th best in the league. I think we said 23rd on SI and 24th on ESPN this year on their player rank list. Talent-wise, he's much higher than that. I can make an argument for him being a top 20 player. But beyond that, the casual NBA fan, kind of the book on Towns is, oh, great offensive player, but he can't get it done because he can't drag his team to the playoffs type of a thing. The only examples of truly great players doing that are, somewhat ironically enough, Kevin Garnett in Minnesota. He did that how many years? 8 years, I think, or 7 straight years with first round playoff exits, where Garnett dragged the carcass of a roster to the playoffs in 7 straight years and just couldn't get it done in the first round because he was the only all-star on the team. And really, frankly, a lot of the rest of the guys getting run in Saunders' rotation back in the late 90s, early 2000s weren't real rotation-worthy guys on a playoff team. LeBron James early in his first stint in Cleveland. That's the other example that Daniel Lebowski gives on this piece. In this piece, I should say. The supporting cast was awful. I mean, Mo Williams and Boobie Gibson were like the other good players or players that were thought to be good on the. Mo Williams is the second best player in all those Cavs teams early on before he went to Miami. And LeBron was good enough to drag that team consistently, second round conference finals. And, Garnett didn't have quite as much success in Minnesota, but he's also not LeBron, as great as Garnett was. So the Booker thing, yeah, I mean, the Suns were bad year in and year out. Booker was a no defense, all offense guy. He wasn't even all that efficient early on. And then he was put into more of a distribution role where he was supposed to be initiating offense, and he struggled with that. And then the Suns went 8-0 in the bubble, and that was, Ricky Rubio came around. That was the season he was in Phoenix. And they were, not an awful team, right? They were in the bubble in the first place, which is certainly more than the Wolves could say. And then they made the finals this year. And I actually talked about this the other day on the show before reading this article as well. But the addition of Chris Paul is obviously a huge thing. And you have to look at the natural progression of DeAndre Ayton especially, but also Mikal Bridges. Some of the other, I shouldn't even say fringe additions. I mean, Jay Crowder was a starter on this team, so it's not a fringe addition. But they shored up the roster a little bit, right? They improved their depth, certainly. But they also, adding Chris Paul is a huge thing. Booker was largely the same guy. He started the year a little bit slow, but he was fantastic. A little bit of a roller coaster in the playoffs, but he was still the best player on a team that went to the finals. And we're still somehow pretending, and again, I say we, speaking broadly about NBA fans, which admittedly is maybe a little bit dangerous, but there's still this thought that like Towns is this empty calorie guy. But the only year that Towns had another all-star caliber player playing with him, or literal all-star in this case, was Jimmy Butler, and they did go to the playoffs, and they were fourth in the West until Butler got hurt. And since then, Towns has been hurt each of the last 2 years. Towns has had 2 coaching changes. Towns has had 2 front office changes. And again, Wolves fans know this, but when you really think about it, and this goes back to what Towns said during his media day interview on Monday, like, really think about it. We know this. We've lived this. I've been talking about this for more than 2 years on this podcast now, about the ebbs and flows of the Timberwolves, the just all the stuff that Towns has been through, especially in the franchise as a whole. But like, really think about this, about how many front offices, how many coaches, how many second best teammates Towns has had, or when Butler was here, Towns was the second best teammate, right? Or Towns was the number 2 guy on the roster, I should say. It's crazy. And now, depending on your thoughts of D'Angelo Russell versus Anthony Edwards, I would say right now in a vacuum, Russell's still the better player, but Edwards, the March, April Edwards of last year, March, April, May, Anthony Edwards is a better player than D'Angelo Russell. If that's who Ant is, he is that guy. Towns and Edwards are the star duo, and D'Lo and Malik Beasley, those are the third and fourth option in some order. And Jaden McDaniels factors in there somewhere too. And this roster is suddenly really, really good. And Towns has not had that. He just hasn't had that. And the other thing that, getting back to Daniel Lebowski's piece, I think he does a great job of just putting it out there. I mean, the numbers are crazy. The career averages for Cat are 22.9 points. So 23 points, 11.6 rebounds, 3 assists, 52.7% from the field, 39.4% from 3, 83.5% from the line. Those are his career averages. Remember, he early in his career didn't shoot that many threes. He was mostly confined to the low post, and then he went to shooting a lot of threes and not playing in the post, and now he's doing a little bit of both. But for him to shoot, as somebody, he's criticized, of course, at times by the Shaqs and the Charles Barkleys is spending too much time on the perimeter. Well, he's shooting almost 40% from 3, and he is at 40% over the past few years. Yet he's still averaging greater than 11 rebounds per game, and he's shooting 53% from the field as a center who's a stretch 5, right? If I guess we want to use that terminology. I mean, no matter where he's out on the floor, he's converting, right? He's efficient. He's an efficient player. And it's so easy to lose that in this race to call him an empty calorie player, or whatever you want to call him. So again, Timberwolves fans know, or at least should know, how good he is, but I think that there's still this national thing, like, hey, he's got to prove it. And I get that to an extent. And yes, he's got to improve defensively. And I've talked about that on the show. But please, I beg you, as the listener, viewer of this podcast, do not overlook how good Karl-Anthony Towns is and how special of a talent he is. And if Edwards could be what we think he can be, then the national folks are going to see this. And I also hope, and this is maybe getting, I don't know, at least 3 steps ahead, but if Edwards becomes that other all-star, let's not forget how good Karl-Anthony Towns is. And I'm getting ahead of this now. I'm preempting the problem. because Karl-Anthony Towns is phenomenal, and Anthony Edwards is also great. But Towns is such a unique talent, and he deserves his due. I think he gets back to All-Star status this year. I think he makes the All-Star team. I don't know about All NBA yet. We'll see. I mean, if he stays healthy, he should. He is one of the best 15 guys in the NBA if he stays healthy, and that's basically what that cutoff is. So, at any rate, good article. If you could find Daniel Lubofsky, again, Lubofsky on Medium, a really good breakdown of Karl-Anthony Towns, Devin Booker, and the idea of empty calorie players, the myth of empty calorie stars. So be sure to go check that out if you can. A reminder that, again, this show's daily. We'll be back Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week. And then again on Monday through Friday, now through the end of the season, whenever the Wolves play until, or actually really through the finals next summer. So plenty of opportunities. Make sure that you're following and subscribed to this podcast anywhere you listen. Again, thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single day. We'll be back again tomorrow talking about the first practice of training camp, which happens on Tuesday. So perhaps by the time you're listening to this, it has happened. On Wednesday's show, we'll talk about any quotes that come out of it, anything that gets out there from training camp, any news, who's running with who, all that good stuff. And then again, later this week, I'm going to get into the NBA rank stuff, the player rank on both ESPN and SI, the players ranked ahead of and behind Towns, Beasley, Russell, and Edwards, the 4 Timberwolves players that were ranked in either one or both of those lists in the case of 3 of those guys. So that's what we have on tap for the rest of the week. Of course, plenty to talk about with training camp. Reminder that if you're not already following this podcast, you could do that free and everywhere. Apple, Google, Spotify, the all new Odyssey app, and of course now on YouTube. This is week 5 of YouTube. Believe it or not, be sure to follow or subscribe on YouTube and like this video if you're watching on YouTube. That would be outstanding, and I greatly appreciate it. You could also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves, and also at Beecken is my account. That's 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. That's all we have for you today here on the show. Thanks once again for listening. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.